Greetings and welcome. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Thank you all so much for being here. Greetings. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Greetings, we'll give it just one more minute. Thank you all so much for being here. All right, Michael, we will go ahead and get started. Thanks so much. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It is a gift. It's a gift to be before you on this afternoon, evening, wherever you might be joining us from. It's wonderful to just be in communion. My name is Dr. Wilson Okello. I'm an assistant professor in the Educational Policy Studies Department at Penn State University. Penn State is located on the traditional homelands of the Erie, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Susquehannock, and the Wazazi nations. As a land-grant institution, I think it's important to acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of the lands and strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. I also acknowledge the longer history of these lands and our place in that history in an effort for me to continually consider place and space. I also want to recognize institutions of higher education writ large as multi-generational sites of violence and dispossession, whereas African ascendant people were subject to the violence of forced labor that continues to shape the social and political life in many regions. For me, grappling with time, with space, with history, the work of memory is part and parcel of how we have to think about and contextualize our work. We're thrilled that you would take time to join us here in the Black Study Education Lab for our Black Research Approaches webinar series. Many thanks to all those who have contributed to this work and really bringing this together. I want to personally just thank Drs. Alicia Dowd and Drs. LaWanda Ward, Director and Associate Directors, respectively, in the Center for the Study of Higher Education at Penn State. I want to thank Michael Morgan and Francisca Figueroa, doctoral students in the higher education program at Penn State. Also, many thanks to Mary Pierce for all of your support, your administrative support with logistics related to the lab. Thank you so much. To Dean Lawless as well in the College of Education at Penn State. You will be able to find a recording of today's event online, and please be on the lookout for additional information related to that matter. Some context and some information first, some framing before we move into our conversation. The Black Study and Education Lab is concerned with exploring the potentialities of Blackness in educational research, practice, and policy. The lab is dedicated to the radical affirmation of Blackness as capacious. Grounded in the belief that Black study is a force of disruption, we seek to destabilize existing epistemological protocols that challenge how knowledge is produced and disseminated. By harnessing Black study to detect and call forth otherwise possibilities, we refuse singularity and ease the solutions to the problematic of anti-Blackness and embrace a dynamic, ever-evolving engagement with Black ideas. These commitments guide our rigorous engagement with Blackness and the Black condition, amplifying voices and experiences beyond institutional boundaries. Our ultimate aim is to deploy Black study as a project of critical analysis and imagining otherwise ways of knowing, doing, and being in the world, creating generative spaces for Black self-definition and Black futures. Regarding our webinar series, Black Research Approaches in Education, we build on the premise that research approaches, processes writ large, often reduce racialization to the study of biological or cultural descriptors rather than a social and political matrix that orders knowledge. If knowledge production, specifically research processes, are to grapple with Black existence meaningfully, it will mean theorizing Blackness as that which materially and discursively operationalizes white logic and methods. Elucidating the function of racialization, Blackness, we believe, constitutes a set of power relations that ascribes and delimits who can lay claim to full human status and those who cannot. That is, insisting on Blackness provides the condition of possibility for setting epistemic, ontological, and axiological foundations that structure Western knowledge production and Black existence. The webinar series this year grapples with this central question: what does it mean to center Blackness in educational research? Our webinar series invites scholars to discuss relationality, aesthetics, ethics, and care. I want to invite audience members to join us in conversation via chat. There will also be time to engage with our panel at the end of their remarks. Some framing as we think about our particular focus for today. I think in the heaviness that is our current social political moment, I'm meditating on this idea of collectivity as a way of doing life in relation. In the 1970s, Black women writers began gathering in Brooklyn and Manhattan, forming themselves into a group who came to informally be known as the Sisterhood. They met once a month, kept minutes, they collected dues. Writers like Alice Walker and June Jordan founded the group. Members included journalists Margot Jefferson and Phil Garland, culinary writers Verda May, Gross Venor, and Jessica Harris, poets like Ntozake Shange and Audre Lorde, and novelist Toni Morrison. Uplifting each other's lives and honoring their craft, they were central to the explosion of literary works in the 1970s and 80s, literature that literally helped to define a generation and still provides anecdotes and seeds, right, coordinates and lessons for the how of living now and into the future. In their connection and building together, I believe that we find notes on the work of relation with oppressed people, those who are experiencing occupation and apartheid. They teach us that to gather and study, to grapple with the long view, is to think about the work of history. That if we are to be responsive in our research, in our practice, in this moment, that we must read against the grain and we must be answerable to the history of a particular matter. I am drawn to this sisterhood because of their lesson of collaborative intellectual praxis. Collaborative intellectual praxis is a modality of Black liveliness and living that followed the tradition of Black writers and theorists who have worked against Western epistemological frames of ownership, property interests, and toward relationality. This sense of connectivity is to begin from an elsewhere, regarded as nowhere and non-human, toward a collaborative way of being, studying, and living in the world that enacts and calls forth struggle. These approaches to referencing and sourcing and communion is to surrender forms of sovereignty as it embodies a mutuality that understands ideas are building on with others, past and present. The posture, I submit, of relationality is one of rethinking and exceeding the self, being as not for ourselves, but actively unknowing ourselves, to unhinge and thus to come to know each other. Relationality as a beginning raises questions about the purposes of our work and all those who would engage in this idea that we call study and research toward social transformation. And so I am elated to be in conversation with our brilliant panelists this afternoon, Drs. Durell Callier and Dominique Hill. Dr. Dominique Hill is a scholar and a cultural worker whose written and performed scholarship interrogates contemporary Black girlhood with the focus on embodiment. Hill is co-author of Performative Intergenerational Dialogues of a Black Quartet and Who, Look at Me, Shifting the Gaze of Education Through Blackness, Queerness, and the Body. Through research, pedagogy, and praxis, Hill extends the field of Black girlhood studies as an assistant professor of women's studies at Colgate University. Dr. Durell Callier is an artist scholar who employs Black feminist and queer methodologies to explore the interconnectivity of race, gender, sexuality, and culture. Callier is co-founder of Hill L. Waters, an arts-based research collaborative that enacts Black queer world making as embodied pedagogy. He is co-author of 2 books, Who Look at Me, Shifting the Gaze of Education Through Blackness, Queerness, and the Body, and Performative Intergenerational Dialogues of a Black Quartet. Qualitative inquiries on race, gender, and sexualities and culture. Callier is an associate professor in the Department of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. Again, we invite you to engage with our participants via chat. Following their talk, we will open the space to questions and reactions as curated from their presentation. Please do place your questions and reactions in the chat, and we will invite Drs. Hill and Callier to respond. Deep bows of gratitude to you both, Dr. Hill and Dr. Callier, for your presence and your work, and I'll go ahead and I'll turn the event over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Okello. That is an amazing setup. We're going to go ahead and start to get our slides situated for you all as we get into the meat and potatoes, or the quinoa and kale, as my co-facilitator, Dr. Hill, oftentimes like to offer a variety of options for folks for whatever might be your main thing. So bear with me as I share my screen.
So first of all, just a quick thank you for you all for being here, taking time out this afternoon, whatever time you are, as we wade through heavy sentiments, as we figure out how to do life amidst so much death and loss and disregard. We come to you really, really humbly, excited, and also honestly like a little tired. Like we've been, going at this thing called living and joy and love. And it's also important that being tired is just a recognition of where one is in the body, but it's also a reminder of the fact that we are living. So I'm gonna ask us to close our eyes and take a quick deep breath, a deep breath in for this moment, that we can fill our lungs, that we can feel the air passing through our nostrils, and hold it at the top. Hold it for ourselves this moment. Hold it for the last self that we let go of or are still hugging. Holding it also for our future, and let it out. All right, so we're gonna spend some time with y'all today. We want y'all to use the chat. We love to hear y'all voices, the amens, whatever you got, put them in the chat. Our title today comes from Tony K. Bambara's The Education of a Storyteller, and If Your Friends Don't Know It, Don't Know Do You? Black Feminist Ways of Grounding, of Knowing. And so we're going to ask you all to place in the chat the names of those you know with. So don't feel the need to hold back. Just drop in the chat, who do you know with? So,
Seeing some folks starting to add who they know with.
yes.
As people are offering up, one of the folks who I always want to know with is my late grandmother, Sylvine Bradford, to whom much of who I am I owe.
I'll also say, I know with Becca Sam, I know with Dr. Okello, I know with my great grandma BJ, I know with Chelsea Bolden, I know with my grandma Mary.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing aunts and maternal grandmothers. I'm seeing classmates here in the chat.
Yes. Seeing ancestors. I'm seeing musicians.
And as we get ready to move forward, it's important that we recognize all of the various people, places, things, communities that ground how we know when we are so often given indirect and direct ways of saying that sometimes the people, places, things, where we come from, those who matter to us most, those who make it possible for us to be here in our very living and breathing, that those people don't know much about the way the world actually works. That they don't know about research, that they don't know about what we might call as the sort of the condition of our living, right? And so we want to start with acknowledging that those people do know. And they know, and we know together. And so we'll come back to that throughout portions of our talk, but it's a part of why we're starting here to be grounded in that type of knowingness that there isn't always room for sometimes, and that we can also forget at times as well. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right on in. This is where we're going today. Our journey today consists of us talking about coming to the work, where we'll talk about how we've been collaborating, Dr. Hill and I, how we have been writing and researching collectively for over 10 years at this point. I will give you a sense of what anchors and informs that work for us. We'll then cover a section called The Work, which provides a case study of our work meant to show in the classic sense of qualitative research what collective research practices rooted in Black radical and specifically Black feminist liberatory practice and traditions, what that looks like. And then lastly, we'll end with Working the Work, which is meant to offer you some specific how-to nuggets that discuss the stakes as in risk of deciding not to journey alone, achieve tenure, publish, navigate academia as students, professionals, or faculty members, to not do that alone. And we also want to discuss with you some of the rewards of doing that work. So coming to the work.
So who are we? I've already said my name, Dominique C. Hill. It's not me without the C. However, I am Dr. Hill, also known as Hill.
And I'm Dr. Callier, also known as Waters. And when our powers combine, we are
Hill
L.
Waters. So we created Hill Waters for people who may or may not know. This is a scholar artist collective rooted in love, Black queer resistance, and art as activism. It was really about a commitment to doing academia and scholarship from a place of love. We started this in grad school. We started to look at the ways that Blackness sort of gets partitioned, and perhaps Black queer men may be together, Black queer women may be together, Black trans folk may be together. What are the ways that masculinity, femininity, these things create these silos? And we said that we wanted to do this work together because we loved each other. And so at different times and for varying reasons, we've called our work by many names. We've called it Black feminist praxis. We've called it performance autoethnography. We've called it collective cultural work. These are just a few things. But grounded within our work is what we take seriously in terms of Moten's insistence that, quote, Blackness is enthusiastic social vision. And said a little bit differently, we think about the importance of Blackness as an intense study of social reality and the structures that make life simultaneously tenable and impossible, but also the ways that Black people forge forward by taking apart, uprooting, and unearthing sensibilities and ways of knowing that may get buried under what we talk about and what Bambara talks about as terrible educations.
Our work rooted in this sort of idea of what does Black life look like as we take stock of historically and in our present moment, the varying conditions that shape Black life, is also about imagining Black life otherwise. It's not just simply about the horror, and there is horror and there is violence that many of us are very familiar with. And there's also joy. And there's also living in spite of, and there's also dreaming and pleasure and so much more. And to do that, a part of what that has looked like for us is to do embodied performances, bringing together theater, spoken word poetry, the aesthetic traditions, Black aesthetic traditions. What you see here are images that tell a story about our performing in various community spaces for over the last decade.
Yeah. And so our coming to performance, the body, art making, and art as ways of knowing were particular journeys for the both of us in different ways. We are happy to discuss that later if folks want to know more details. But for the purpose of our talk today, one of the pivotal spaces that has fostered our knowingness was around the sort of collective known as Saving Our Lives, Here Are Truths, Soul Hot. And so Soul Hot operates under many modalities, but in many ways it uses art in all of its manifestations to celebrate Black girlhood in all of its complexities. It may operate under the guise of an after-school program for some people, but it is really an intergenerational space dedicated to making Black girlhood a thing that is real, a thing that goes beyond Black girl lamentation, a thing that goes beyond mentoring girls, but to really think about if we sense into girlhood as something that is both simultaneously denied by sort of structures that regard Blackness in these adultified ways or in ways that associate Blackness with criminality. If we take that off, if we take off the veneer of that and we reject that while simultaneously critiquing that, what is a sort of futuristic space? What is a geographic space that has no borders and boundaries for us to make ourselves real and unmake ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Centering Soul Hot as a space in which we know and have practiced collectivity in research You'll see it plastered all on the shirts that are represented here. And what we want to note about Soul Hot is that it's been a place in which we've not only just created creative scholarship, but we've also written about the practice of working in collectivity, and specifically about what does that mean, look like, smell like, taste like, in terms of working with Black girls and with each other as well.
So this is an article that was the introduction to a special issue called Saving Our Lives, Hear Our Truths, exploring the theory, praxis, and creativity of Black girlhood studies through critical departures and qualitative inquiry. This collection of essays, scholarly papers, and poetry explores issues of race, sexuality, gender, and class as they interact with the lives of Black girls. This issue dedicated explicitly to the burgeoning field of Black girlhood studies, a subfield that's taken up by critical youth studies, taken up by girl studies, taken up by women, gender, and sexuality studies. The collection explores national and transnational conversations about girlhood, the politics of girlhood studies, and approaches to the study and research of Black girls, as well as the particular tensions and possibilities of working with and for Black girls.
And so, this is just our way of saying, check it out if you're interested in Black girlhood studies, if you're interested in the lives and well-being of Black girls, if you desire models for being in community with Black girls and women in celebratory, liberatory, life-affirming ways, or if you just want some examples of, say, for instance, syllabi and important readings in the field, this text does a lot of that work. And demonstrates, right, like the very ways that we can think about what does it mean to do research that centers Black liberation in particular. And thank you for whoever dropped it in the chat.
So this quote, our talk, the title, comes from The Education of a Storyteller by Toni Cade Bambara. If you have not read this text, put it on your list. We do scholarship together because we understand, as Grandma Dorothy reminds, that coming to know is not done alone, nor is it something to benefit us alone. We harness creativity and come to scholarship genuinely curious, willing, and surrendering to process and practice. And just a quick shout out, Dr. Okello also has a piece riffing from this text as well. But the quote that you all saw on the screen is really about, it's a moment in the text where little Toni is coming home super excited because she learned Einstein's theory of relativity. And Grandma Dorothy is saying, well, sweetie, give it to me. And was like, well, let me know when I need to move a hip. Let me know when I need to do all these things, right? This really embodied approach that Grandma Dorothy understood, because Grandma Dorothy also understood that education was something that needed to be liberatory. Education was something that needed to be embodied. Education was something that needed to be felt. And if you were going to make sure that people got the message, then you needed to move it through the entire system of a self in order to make that thing come to being. And so that quote, madam, if your friends don't know it, then you don't know it. And if you don't know that, then you don't know nothing, was really because little Toni was boasting that nobody knew it, and that her friends didn't know it, that nobody knew it. And so Grandma had to get little Toni straight. And then also this beautiful ending of, now what else are you pretending not to know today, colored gal? Which was about, again, this sensibility of underneath the sort of practices that have been imposed upon us, underneath the particular sets of pedagogies that have been used to educate us intellectually, such as in the ivory tower, that there is another deeper, a sort of intuitive, spiritual perhaps place that we know that may again get knocked out by nature of terrible educations. And so this is where we are in the story, and this is why we bring this quote.
Yeah. And if we perhaps had a tad bit more time, because I know both Dr. Hill and I use this text across the courses that we oftentimes teach, we come back to it in our own work. And if we had more time, we would take the time to wax poetic, or in a very Black religious tradition, we would take our time to really talk about how this text sets up a knowing that is communal, that is collective, that is rooted in non-Western traditions, that the Black radical tradition calls us to know with and from the communities we said we came to grad school on the behalf of, that we said we wanted to help, that we spent nights with very little sleep, maybe little food, reading folks we had never heard of, many of whom might not have looked like us, thought about the places we were coming from, or the issues that were most pressing to us. And in that circumstance, we said to ourselves, despite what we were experiencing, that this is for our people. And yet, our people don't know what we know. And it becomes so important what Bambara leaves us here with, as Dr. Hill, pointed out, right? Like, if our folks don't know, and you don't realize that that is absolutely important, what else are you pretending not to know today? Mm-hmm. And we'll just leave that question in the air, because oftentimes we can fool ourselves into not knowing what matters most, who matters most, what the stakes are when we choose not to show up on the behalf of each other. What else are we pretending not to know today? And so moving into the next section of our talk, we after giving you all a little bit of how we come to this work, what has our work been? And so a part of that work looks like this image here from 2017, in which we debuted When the Stakes Are Too Damn High. It was a performance that was really meant to talk about the various impossibilities, if you will, the various struggles from environmental to the viralized impacts, or rather the viralized depictions, if you will, of Black death, of non-Black life within the US and beyond, the ways that policing and anti-Black violence are connected to the impacts of environmental justice in our contemporary moment, as they were also shaped by past decisions with regards to the ways that we treat or don't treat our land, vis-a-vis, colonialism and imperialism. And we thought specifically, during that performance about what are the stakes? That is, the consequences of not doing and thinking collectively. Specifically, what results in our inability to think of ourselves in a Black feminist tradition as interdependent upon one another. That is, our well-being, needs, desires, freedoms are wrapped up in each other, at the edge of each other's battles or struggles, as Audre Lorde says, and perhaps said differently in the Gwendolyn Brooks tradition, quote, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business," end quote. However, being each other's business, when we are so often told to mind our own business, told that research, success, navigating higher education are solo endeavors, can be difficult to navigate and to actually enact the sort of praxis of being interdependent and being each other's business. To model collectivity, its layers, and how Black feminists and also womanist principles ground us in such work, we offer as case and representation an excerpt of a poem we entitled Black Tourmaline. We'll share more, but for now, we just want to share a section from Black Tourmaline, which that section is called The Load. We invite you into the wait the process of beginning off kilter and shifting, weight together to reground, representing the different sentiments and materialities we encountered. Each moment has a different weight to it. We ask that you hold them with us. The load.
3, the load.
Very little prepares you for this. I didn't know, couldn't have guessed to live with this in the living room and hallway, your new office across from her old one, her Nak Champa, still lingering, her ending, your beginning. I was waiting for the day to be carried.
Yet here we were, both Black and queer, both first of our kin, firstborn, first to go this far, learning new ways to be watered, to be tuned.
To say, I love you, still and again. Don't think he knew what I swallowed. I'm here for you, still and again.
Don't think I knew how to share my load. I support you still and again. We will make it through this, still and again and again and again.
Don't think
Don't
we
think
knew
we knew what
we were carrying. Just sitting in that for a little bit. Since graduate school, we have been surviving Black and queer together. In our pursuit, we have been and continue to call on lessons taught to us by Black youth, people who raised us, as well as Black feminist and womanist theory and principles. Black tourmaline is a crystal, or rather in the crystal world, it is a crystal, and in the crystal world, right, is known as a grounding stone used to aid in protection, especially as pertaining to one's psyche. The poem Black Tourmaline emerges from a letter writing and exchange series where we wrote letters to each other, reflecting on and looking into a moment that challenged us, helped us name stakes of working side by side, and affirmed our political commitments to love and collectivity in the academy. But let's talk a bit about how collectivity and love inform the creation of this poem, its contents, and process of writing the article, Surviving Black Together, Feminist and Womanist Creative Intimacies.
So in our mobilization, I'm like choked up a little bit. In our mobilization of the concept love, we draw from bell hooks and understand love to be the will to cultivate the spirit of another and oneself, right? And so love is an action. Love, you be loving, right? You act in that regard, and you act in the interest of the cultivation, the watering of someone else's spirit. And so here, this poem, which you got the third piece of the poem, this poem was made from us going back to a particular moment, right? A moment where we were doing this thing called the Academy, and it called an opportunity for us to leverage and move forward in life. But in that same movement, in that same moment, it also created a tension, a tug, a pull. And so we used rememory to go back into the moment of navigating that particular experience. We went back into that moment and we decided to write letters to each other, because in that moment of navigating the challenge that was posed to us, we were living together, literally, physically. We were still creating together, literally. We were writing this book together, literally, right? And we were loving each other, and we were growing together and growing each other through some of the challenges that we were growing. So at the same time, love was inevitably there, but there was still a weight. There was a weight that we were carrying. And so we went back, we wrote these letters to each other, and we used the writing from those letters, and we mailed them to each other. We wrote them by hand. We went and got stamps. We chose deliberately about what stamps we were going to use, and we mailed them. And we read them separately, and then we came back to the table together to then be curious about what had we missed in the process of being together, what had we overlooked, what didn't we know, and what do we know now. And so Black Tourmaline rose up as like, it was the stone, because our love and our collectivity aided in the protection of what could have actually caused some real tension, like what could have actually ruptured a potential possibility of a future in some way together. That if love had not been present, if collectivity had not been present, if a will to cultivate each other's spirit had not been present, something could absolutely have gone awry, or something could have not gone spoken about. But that's not what happened. And so we therefore place value and commitment and intentionality and embrace the dirty work that comes with choosing to live honestly and lovingly in intimate relationship, particularly in a space that asks us and depends on us to not be loving, to not be intimate, and to not really be honest with each other about what we need, where we're coming from, where we're trying to go.
Yeah, and maybe this is worthwhile in the Q&A, but just sort of putting a bit of a point, a highlight here. I'm reminded of the ways that we oftentimes in our society can romanticize love, and we don't think about changing dirty diapers. Like, oh, I love the baby, and there's some other stuff that comes with, our love sometimes, that we have to deal with, not just the good, but some of the bad and some of the funk. I'm reminded very much so of one of my favorite lines, and I'm going to butcher it just a little bit, but one of my favorite lines from Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin and a Son. It's when the mom is talking to Beneatha about her brother, and is she's saying that there's nothing, Beneatha rather, saying that there's nothing left to love, and the mother is like, when do you think is the appropriate time to love someone? What do you mean there's nothing left to love about your brother? He needs us in this moment, right? Like, and clearly butchering the lines, right? This is the sentiment of the moment, and I'm assuming most of us have read, seen some version of A Raisin in the Sun, and so you understand that particular moment. And if you haven't, I encourage you, please go look at that. But the point here is that sometimes we are convinced that there's nothing left to love. Sometimes we're convinced that love doesn't require us to stretch, especially in a space that does not know love. And I'm just going to also leave a point there so that we can get to the end of our talk and be able to dialogue with you all and have some questions. So what does it mean for us to work the work? Working the work is our last section, and we want to begin to provide you with some more food for thought, but specifically to talk about the risk of doing this, the rewards, and the ways that we have done this work that might also be of use to you.
So this quote, y'all, this week, 2023, I don't know how y'all feel, but 2023 has been trying me, okay? Trying me. So this quote though, of course we know how to walk on water. Of course we know how to fly. Fear of sinking though, sometimes keeps us from the first crucial move. Then two, the terrible educations you liable to get is designed to make you destruct the journey entire. So one, I'm gonna let y'all just sit on that. Like, what journeys might you have almost not stepped forward on by nature of what someone said you ought not do, by nature of someone saying, well, that's not how people typically do it. That's not the common way. Just to think for a moment about when you stopped yourself, even if you went forward, you stopped yourself. But what was that lesson? What has somebody implanted in you that was willing, that made you almost willing to stop short of the vision that you saw, the thing that you knew to be true? And so again, like, this is the final paragraph of this story, right? In this final paragraph, these words are stated by Grandma Dorothy as both a reminder and a warning, and as a final cautionary to little Tony. Grandma Dorothy was pointing to the consequences of digesting terrible educations. We understand terrible educations to be dangerous, and primarily because we say that it teaches us, trains us even to act against our self-interest, against actualizing our own gifts. And in our book, Who Look at Me, we talk about what are the particular gazes, what are the particular practices, what is the sort of osmosis, if you will, to call upon Pat Parker, that happens, that seeps into our skin, that seeps into our spirit, that seeps into our thoughts, that then directs our action or inaction. And those are the things that we talk about as terrible educations. We provided here, as we transition to some of the legit stakes of doing collectivity alongside what we also know to be true, because we do know how to walk on water and we know how to fly together, right?
The risk and impediments of doing this work can be perceived at least in two ways, perhaps more. But they can be perceived both internally and externally. And so here's a short, non-exhaustive list of some risks and impediments to embarking upon doing this work, working in collectivity, working collaboratively. And as a small caveat, we're speaking specifically from humanistic and social science specific contexts. There are other places, across our lovely space of higher ed, where collaboration is oftentimes encouraged and built in to particular metrics. And so we just want to contextualize, right, when we're talking about these risks internally and externally, that they can consist of things like confusion about how to evaluate your work. This spans the life arc of a career in academia. If criteria for success, promotion, graduation is measured by individual achievement, then who gets credit for what? How much? Which institution? Whose dissertation is this really?
Also, lack of support. This is not about ill will or intention often, but it is about working within systems that are not designed to.
Impediments can also consist of things like time. Collective work, working in genuinely collaborative ways, takes time. It takes a lot of time. And oftentimes time is the one thing that we feel as though we don't have enough of, because there are so many demands to our jobs, to our lives, that figuring out, taking the time or making the time to actually be in space, placed together, that prioritizes relationships over products, takes a lot more time than I think we sometimes are willing to acknowledge. Other impediments to doing this work. So even if you are willing, right, like you might say the risk, I'm willing to risk it all because I am so committed to the reasons that I came here, because I do want to make room for the people who we said that we know with, right? Because I'm willing to do that, I'm willing to take the risk, and yet you might still encounter the impediment of training. Most of our programs do not teach us how to work together and how to survive together. Maybe you had a very different experience. I did. I am so grateful that I had a very different experience for a variety of reasons. And it was a beautiful experience that was intergenerational, that was, centered around potlucks, that was, centered around going out together, showing up for each other's defenses, practicing together, scheduling intentionally our qualifying exams around the same time as one another, for example, to make sure that we got through it together, figuring out who was going to bring food to the person who was doing their qualifying exam, showing up for each other when we were sick, being there for, the births of people's babies, and again, showing up with food. Like, that can seem like it is not a part of what gets you through. That's not training. That's not reading Derrida. That's not figuring out what Foucault said. That's not reading the souls of Black folks. It's not doing the paper. And so it's not a part of the training. And whether or not those things, whether or not, in terms of what you're reading, right? Like, our training sometimes doesn't also highlight the very context in which knowledge is created. And, just going back to what Dr. Okello offered up in sort of contextualizing our talk, right? Like, we will read the works of our faves and divorce it from the material realities and conditions that when June Jordan and Audre Lorde were having struggles with cancer, they were writing to each other, trying to figure out how to support each other. That the Combahee River Collective had cookies every time they met together. And that they figured out how to meet together with what resources they had. That there were collectives, that Toni Morrison was a part of a collective. Like, we don't talk about that sometimes, y'all. And I think because we don't, we're missing some things.
Related to that, we miss some things because models, these are harder to come by because of how we're trained, and at times divorce these things from each other, divorce the work from the context, as Dr. Callier was saying, but also we get lost and confused about what is the actual work. When we get wrapped up in the reading the text, the doing the text, as Dr. Okello talked to some of my students earlier today, how do we spend time and be with the text? And then also, how do we spend time and be with each other? How do we be with our bodies as we engage a text? And what does that reveal to us, right? But that rush, that need to produce, and also a particular cachet about what production looks like and how it materializes outside of the self, those things can also lend themselves to us being confused about the work. And here we're thinking about, again, the Black feminist, womanist of color models, like these artist collectives. I think about also how they sent pictures to each other. If you go to the archives, there were moments where they just sent photos to each other, photos of their children, photos of scenery to inspire each other as they wrote, as they, made life and made their ideas come into being in their respective corners of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, and just offering up some impediments, right? We want to acknowledge fear as a very real thing, right? Even if you are like, I do want to do this, I'm willing to risk it all, we still might come against that idea of fear. And as Toni K. Bambara puts it in the quote, right, fear of sinking, sometimes might hinder our willingness to engage in research and ways of being rooted in collective care. Because of all the things that we don't know, because of all the things that we have been taught through our terrible educations, for example, right? Like stepping into collective care. And I'm gonna put another fork in there because I will spend too much time there, because I have seen time and time again how much we long to be in collective care, but don't know how to receive it and don't know how to show up to it. The gift of being taken care of. But we got to get finished. And so how can you do this work?
And so happy to talk about particulars, but one is realizing that difference is a non-negotiable. When I think back to the ways that different Black feminists and womanist spiritual folk have talked about difference, it is really conceptualized very differently than how we think about difference in society. And so Audre Lorde theorizes difference as this resource, but also acknowledges that within this sort of racial capitalist society, Audre talks about, paraphrasing, Audre talks about how society organizes around difference in three particular ways. One, we obliterate it as a society, so we literally blow that thing up. We ignore it, and or we undermine it, right? And so the point of that is that difference is organized around something that is problematic, something to be contained, something to be, something to be choked out. And so when we understand that there's a need to embrace difference as a non-negotiable, then we also enter spaces understanding that, one, we got to learn the language of each other to understand what is being said. Is it actually different? Is it very different from what I'm saying, or are we using different language? What's our investments? And if we're using different sets of language, are we invested in the same things? Is it just about the language? Is it a semantic thing? Or is this really about we just don't rap the same? And these things become important and require time, right? And so Dr. Callier and I can talk about this, but like, we have worked diligently to learn each other. Y'all, I promise you, this was no easy walk. We can talk about it from an astrological perspective. We can talk about it in terms of how we talk about and think about embodiment differently, but it was so worth it. It was so worth it to be in real relationship. And so Audre, that is, advises that we agree to utilize our differences as tools for adding dimension to our work, right? To add the texture to it. Anybody had a sandwich that you needed, anybody like chips on their sandwich? Like, you just need that crunch. You need the layers. You need the dimension to actually have that thing go the way you want it to go in your mouth, like to savor it. And so dimension requires that we think bodily and that we do knowledge. Sarah Ahmed talks about doing knowledge, like people doing knowledge. So it isn't just about when we say we produce it or we write it out or we bring it forth, it's about how do we do it? How does our knowing about community live in our actions? How does it show up in the way we greet each other or don't? How does it show up in our posture when we walk into these spaces like these conference rooms? How does it show up in our willingness to lend a hand or spend time, right? Like, the dimension requires that we be with each other to see what gifts are present, what are the differences, and then how can they make, a flavorful meal and not just become, a disastrous sort of stew, if you will. I don't like stew that much, but that's a personal thing. And then we want to think about centering love, right? As this necessary ingredient. Again, to have the will to cultivate someone's spirit as well as your own requires an ability to balance. It requires an ability to be with someone and to be with them when it is the least convenient, right? Because collectivity is not about convenience. And when we get to the Q&A, we can also talk about how we talk about and think about collaboration versus collectivity. As Dr. Callier was mentioning, like, people do a lot of collaboration, but what what is a mainstay of collaboration, and then how do we do collectivity? And so the last thing I'll say is like embodying Black feminisms in action as a project of turning towards each other, not turning away out of our differences, not finding reasons why we can't rock with each other, but finding reasons to rock with each other, finding reasons to be in space together, finding reasons to ask the questions, finding reasons to be honest, right? Finding reasons to draw closer to each other and be in proximity with each other. And I think about the ways that when I go into a lot of the archives, when I go into the archives of Audrey, when I go into the archives of June, when I go into these archives, y'all, they was feuding, they was writing letters to each other, hot about it, hot about what somebody just said, hot about it. Sister Outsider is a lot of hot about it to other Black feminists. Like, they were hot about it, but they had the conversation. And how can you do collectivity if you aren't willing to have the difficult conversations? When you aren't willing to show up to the things that somebody might call you up on and be like, let's talk about that, right? And then after they had the conversation, they still stayed in relation. They didn't keep it petty. They didn't then write the letter, but then go behind the back and say, you know, whatever. No, they kept it 100, and they also still sent cookies, right? And also got each other gigs and got each other opportunities, right? Related to resources.
Yeah. There's also something there about showing up and in love that's also about showing up to extend grace as well. That you know, something that we can talk about a little bit more if you so choose to do this work, right? Like, how might you do this? Is being committed to rendering accessible and effective narrations of Black life and culture. And so what do we mean by that, right? Like, if we go back to where we started, if you say, you know, with the folks that you know with from around the way, from back home, who you happen to meet, who took real good care of you at that conference or through grad school, or through, you know, that first job that you got or whatever it is, right? That if they, you know, in a very Badu sort of way, you know, what good do your words do if they can't understand you, right? Like, no, really, what are we creating that doesn't necessarily communicate to the very people who we say we love, that's not accessible to those folks? How do we make this work? These models, these realities, these policy changes, how do we make them accessible and to matter to the folks? How do we also show up in the ways that we do when we narrate that Black life and Black culture is not just about all the bad and terrible, but is complex. And we'll that's actually a really good segue to the next slide of, right, like, doing this work requires us, if we're going to be rooted in a radical Black intellectual tradition that makes room for our collective knowing in service to our collective being, that we begin and end with archiving and affirming the sacredness of all Black people, of all Black pleasures and Black life, that we actually do take the time to document our past and present while imagining us here, now, into the future, and free. And that's hard work. You know, I'm reminded of Darnell Moore, who says, you know, one person's freedom dreams is another person's nightmare. Right. And so, you know, we do have to figure that out together. Like, what does our collective liberation look like when, you know, my vision of that might be your hell, quite honestly. If liberation is the goal, and harkening back to the education of a storyteller from Toni Cade Bambara, then we have to engage multiple modalities. If we're going to do this work, it means that we have to engage the body, that we have to engage visual imagery. And for us, it has looked like engaging specifically Black queer, feminist aesthetics and sensibilities. I know, I believe it was Alex wrote in the chat earlier about, Afrofuturism, right? Like engaging multiple modalities, multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of representing is important in doing this work because there is so much work to do. There is no, silver bullet. There is no one, one size fits all, so to speak, right? What you might be really good at is not the thing that I'm going to be really good at. We need all of that. We need all of us to be able to do this. In the story, Grandma Dorothy was waiting for her part. She was like, let me know when I can pat my feet. I can sing along. When can I move my hips? She wants to know in a way that little Tony is like, that's not what the theory of relativity is about. And Grandma Dorothy is like, how is the theory of relativity not about me being able to do these things that I know symbolize what it means to know, that are spaces in which knowledge are rooted for me. They're rooted in my hip. They're rooted in my ability to pat along, to get in rhythm with what you're trying to say to me. So how is there something that is knowable out in the world that I can't know in these ways? Make it make sense. The math is not mathing. So we have to be able to engage in multiple ways to speak, present, perform, and perceive the world around us. And lastly, we should absolutely aspire to complex tellings of self, selves, and culture, responding to culture in, of, between, and beyond the self. We've said it once, we'll say it again, right? Like, we have to be clear about when we see each other, when we see Blackness, what are the ways in which we are seeing each other and seeing ourselves? And how do we make capacious space for the complexity and nuance? How do we not only see what's right on the surface, but dig a little bit deeper than that, so that we can also imagine a variety of possibilities?
Yeah. You was going in, huh? And so some of the tools, again, the stakes, these things that are on here, specifically like autoethnography in general, has been something that has given us such life, but also is something that inherently was a stake. There were people that actually was like, that is not a legit method. Like, that is not a legit method. And so when you talk about needing to know, one, it becomes so important for you and for us to know so deeply that what we are trying to do, even if it don't make sense to nobody else, that we know this is a path that has to be taken, and it has to be taken by me. Because there will be so many folk saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. And so Black feminist autoethnography, one, has really helped us trouble what is the auto? Like, what is the I? Who is the I? Who's the I that we're speaking from? And then who's the sort of collective I that we're bringing forth? And so Hillel Waters actually became that third I, like it became the I plural of us. So it's not Dr. Callier, is not me. It's a combination of us coming together in space, being honest, being vulnerable, interrogating issues related to Black life, Black living, Black pleasures, Black possibilities. Right? Black visuality and embodiment, right? Again, that texture. How do you not only represent research, but how do you tell a story? Education of a Storyteller was so beautiful as well, because Bambera was talking about how there's a piece in a section in the piece where Bambara says, "It was my grandma Dorothy who taught me critical theory," right? And so when we think about what it means to learn theory, Black feminist theory teaches us that theory is applied practice. Going back to Grandma Dorothy and need to be able to move these hips, right? It's applied. It isn't something that we just write on paper. It isn't something that we dress up in beautiful language. It isn't just something that lands in a publication. It needs to move us. And it needs to be something that's shared. And when it's shared, it should move others. And so these textures, these layers of visuality and embodiment become super, super important. And then performance as well. I couldn't say it better, like we said it, but like tactically, performance is an intimate space to speak Blackness into its own existence, right? You can get that, page 52, if you want to look, if you have the book. But like, it's a space to imagine and practice freedom, a space for unbridled Black pleasures. Moreover, performance offers a way for bodily knowledge to be placed front and center, and for the knowledge created between the performers and audience to be made available to both. Right. And so when we're talking about the audience, we're also talking about just our everyday. Who are we walking by and being with? How does performance and us standing full and fully present in ourselves, what does that move and shake, right? There was someone, I think it was Dr. Candace, somebody earlier talked about what does it mean to show up? What happens when we show up? Yes, Dr. Hall. What happens when we show up as who we are, as a communal people, not as people subscribed to hyper individualism, right? And so, and then lastly, this polyvocal, we really wanted to wrestle with, in our particular collectivity, what does it mean for Black men and Black women to speak with each other? And not just at or to, thinking about the tensions, thinking about the realities of Blackness and how gender has circulated in that space, and also sexuality. How do we speak with each other? And how do we get to a place where we trust each other enough to speak for each other?
So really beginning to wrap this up for us here, we want to close out with at least discussing some of the rewards. We've talked about what makes this work difficult to do. We've talked about what are the things you might want to consider if you're going to do this work. What are some things that we have utilized in our toolbox that you might also be able to utilize in your own, knowing that there is more, but just giving some spaces and places that have been really useful for us. We, want to leave you with some rewards. And some of those rewards look like being able to publish together.
Yeah, one of our many co-authored texts together, we got a lot, y'all. Like so many that honestly, we probably have a similar CV, like legit. And people were like, that's not what you do. But you see, Dr. Callier got tenure though. Anyway, so again, like these conversations, not just accepting it can't be done, and just taking that on the head, but really knowing, again, you could walk on water. And so we have made a commitment to publish in many ways that speak to our collectivity while navigating these metrics of success, like really having to think about what does it mean. We can talk about how we can, if people are interested, we can talk about how we've shifted, like how we've negotiated that outside of sort of like the conventional metrics of what does it mean to be first author, for example. We can talk about that in the Q&A if people are interested. But we've really thought deliberately about it because collectivity is so important to shifting this space.
And thinking about those rewards, right? Like our publishing together has allowed for the whole to be more than our separate parts. It's a reward that, in doing this thing together, we're able to actually know more. We each bring our own sets of expertise and experiences, which leads to richer work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another one is companionship. y'all know this could be lonely. Like this road, this walk, writing in and of itself can be lonely, if you let it, right? Our choosing each other has meant having support. It's also meant making room for celebration of each small and large milestone in relationship to both our scholarship, but also just our person, right? Our sense of self.
The rewards has also looked like the words that were penned here in this poem.
Love is
Ourselves,
co-authored
a love poem
to
to each
each
other.
other.
That concludes our talk. I'm going to quickly go through some references for you all in case people are curious about anything that we've referenced. Just a couple of our references, some of the people who we are thinking with oftentimes, right? And yeah, we're going to open things up to the Q&A, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in a moment. Thank you all.
Thank you.
If we could just take a moment and show love in whatever way makes sense to you, clap hands. You can come off mute. You can offer whatever you need to do. But Drs. Hill and Drs. Callier, thank you. Thank you for your consistency, for the love that you've offered us, the love that you offer each other, the beautiful model of relationality that we got to witness, and that we get to follow up with in your work and in your practice. And so thank you. Thank you. And so just let that sit for a minute while I look to the chat. We are entering into a space of question and answer. Our panelists have graciously offered this sort of next 15 minutes to just really be in conversation with you all. And so I would invite you, if you do have questions, to please share them in the chat. You can share them with us, and Dr. Hill and Callier are excited to engage with you all to get us moving while we think about what you all think through questions and offerings. I will first say I think I just need to acknowledge that Drs. Hill and Callier have been so instrumental to my coming to know. I appreciate the question that Dr. Hill began with, and inviting us to think about how we know and who do we know with. I had an opportunity to study alongside them. They took me under their wing in beautiful ways, and publicly, I just want to thank you both for your deep investment in me. So thank you for that. I'll begin with something I think folks were particularly struck by. Well, the whole thing is particularly striking, but you all talked about this notion of collectivity and collaboration. And so I'll read from your text, Who Look at Me, Shifting the Gaze of Education Through Blackness, Queerness, and the Body. You all write, I quote, the joys of working in collectivity versus collaboration prove intense and necessary. We realize that collaborations usually offer clearly defined beginnings and endings, yet we seek to continue. Despite its intent of togetherness, collaboration often takes the form of lone creating and writing with a piecing together of individual creations. Whereas we wrote this virtually, face-to-face, live, via Google Doc together, and they were talking about a particular form of scholarship that they pieced together. And so I would love for you all to just tease that out for us. Could you all talk to us more about this delineation that you all are making between collectivity and collaboration? And again, if you have questions, you all will be next.
Yeah. we've been talking about this for a while. So thank you, Dr. Okello. Thank you for continuing to shine. You got this Black Study Lab doing the thing. If y'all rocking with Dr. Okello, keep rocking. You're in a good place. I have not said this out loud, but collaboration to me does not require commitment. It requires, and when I mean commitment, I mean like a long stay. When people collaborate, when we think about collaborative partnerships and things of that sort, we wanted to write into there to say, like, we literally sat next to each other and thought about the sentences that we were making. We didn't say, you do this part, I do that part, but we literally sat together to sort of struggle with, what was it that we were trying to communicate? How do we actually create a voice that is either one of ours, but is another voice that is bringing forth an important conversation that needs to be had? Collaboration doesn't necessarily, in my experience, require that type of wrestling. It requires an agreement, right? A set of terms on which to work forth, right? Like we produce a co-authored piece, and you go off and you write the theoretical framework, and I go off and I write the method section, and somehow we come together and we decide based on some set of terms who gets the first author, who doesn't. And then if we write together again, we may make decisions again around the same set of conversations about who did what, who did 70% of, right, in this sort of conventional sense. But when we talk about collectivity, to me, one, it was always and already about love as an ingredient. And I'll turn that over to Dr. Callier.
Yeah, I'm here thinking about how this is recording, and
right. I said, take a risk. Take a risk.
Thinking about the metaphor that I might use here. I would venture to say, right, as Dr. Hill has put forward here, one of the other things that distinguishes collaboration and collectivity from me, or for me, right, is there have been some collaborations that I have left, y'all, and have not thought twice about it. That didn't work out. Oh, well, like I can no longer show up to do this work in the ways that I so desired. Y'all go on and run. Collaboration oftentimes feels like dating. It is not a marriage. It is not a long-standing commitment in the ways that, to me, collectivity, when I have chosen to leave, and I don't think I've necessarily left the collective, but the point is like choosing to leave a collective, for me, that's not as easy as deciding I can no longer put forward my part of this paper. Like the leaving because the relationship is different, right? Like, we said that we were doing something together for that we were in a relationship together. And you could tease that out and say collaboration is also a relationship, but it feels like it's a relationship that has a particular means. Right? Like, we're both swiping right and we're gonna collaborate. But that's very different than having to, make that a long-standing, I want to, see you when you wake up with the crust in your eyes. Like, that's different.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're also saying, Dr. Callier, even though we haven't talked about this in a while since we wrote the book, but I think it's also like collectivity is about, when we talk about the textures of things, there's a finite agreement. Somebody was just in the chat saying, hey, group work, right? Like, that's a finite agreement. You're trying to work together for some type of project, some type of facilitation, some type of presentation, whereas collectivity is about this deeper work. And so even though we may not sit down for a whole year and write another piece, we are in relation. And so the relation stays, right? Like, the relation and the work becomes and is always more than the production that people see on the outside. And so that distinction as well becomes again, that will to cultivate another person's spirit. It's like, well, yes, we want to write papers, but how's your spirit right now, Dr. Callier? Like, what you got going on? Like, okay, well then, no, we're not going to do that, but we're going to still stay in relation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that that's a good segue into one of the questions I see here in the Q&A, which is asking, can we both reflect on how we've navigated the first authorship piece? Yeah. How do we want to answer that?
I mean, there's layers, but you could
Yeah,
start.
there are layers. I was like, I'll start with, we have thought about this differently over a period of time. So I wish I could remember our first publication together, but again, we've been at this for over 10 years at this point. And so there have been multiple opportunities for us to publish. The various things that we have thought about over time has been, I say, for example, in an equality model, right? Like, it was you last time, it's me this time, you know, like just being very like one for one. There have been other models that have been perhaps more equity focused, if you will, right? Like, where are we each in our own processes in terms of navigating academia? There has been the recognition of labor in the conversations, labor, and I would say sort of particular expertise, right? And so, you know, again, because this is going to live in time immemorial, I'm happy to have a very particular conversation with you about that. But I will say we've had different models over our time together, and we've had to think about our collective relationships to power, as well as our individual relationships to power with regards to our own precarities, as we were navigating in different ways, parallel tracks, but very different tracks.
So there was, I think you answered that question. And we're happy to talk more, you know, again, other questions that we saw, navigating certain methodologies and epistemologies not being viewed as valid as graduate students. That's a real situation and a real thing. The beautiful thing that Dr. Callier pointed to, we also graduated from the same department, and there was a bevy of folk. We basically went to a HBCU at a predominantly white institution, and one that weren't going to do it, wasn't for it, somebody else was. And so one of the things to think about is, how do you get the training that you need to have to stand firm on your own footing to do the work that you want to do? So that's one, is like, the people in your department may not be for it, but how do you get that type of training in order for you to, even if they push back against you doing it in your dissertation, how do you get out and finish and know that, okay, I have this under my belt, right? Because sometimes it isn't an all or nothing situation. Sometimes it's about getting that training, putting it in your publications, working with people, co-authoring, co-publishing with other faculty who are already doing that type of methodology. But very much, you have to get that training so that you can stand on your own footing. In terms of moving, I have left all sorts of places. Part of, life and needing a job is a real thing, but also just giving people the idea that you have translatable skills. Please don't think that going to the academy and getting a PhD means that all you can do is like be a faculty member or be a researcher. So one, it is, for me, it's been keeping in mind what I am here to do, keeping in right relationship, why did I come to this space? And really having to ask myself questions of, when I start to feel like this may not be it for me, what is that about? Or when I feel like I'm being taken off my course, then how do I course correct or recalibrate myself? What it has also meant for me is really trying to cultivate an internal sense of, what is the goal? What is the vision for me? And then calibrate that against what other people are trying to suggest to me, versus the opposite. Because it can be very easy to get in a space of, well, they said I need to do this, they said I need to do that. Well, if you're trying to actually be a community-based scholar and they're telling you you need to present 25 conferences, but you aren't working on translating and making your work and your theory accessible, well, then you're actually derailing your own set of visions in lieu of what somebody else is trying to ask you to do and be cultivated toward. And so some of those things are just really sitting with, like, what are the tools that I want to cultivate? What is the watering that I need to do for myself because of where I want to go? And then measure other people's suggestions up against where you're trying to go. You know, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that suggestion. I'll really think about that. And then think about it or don't. but know what you really want.
Yeah. I see a question that I think we have answered in some ways, right? Which was about current undergraduate philosophy student, and advice for keeping true to ourselves while also succeeding in academia. And in addition to what's already been said, what I would also offer up is being clear about why you are pursuing the degrees that you are. At the end of the day, I knew why I was there, and I kept that front and center about why I was there. And would remind myself, time and time again, right? Like I'm here because I want to, show my folks back home that they can, go as far as they want to, that the sky's the limit, right? And like, so let me get out here and be able to, show that, right? I also was the type of student, still am the type of human being who was not all study, no play. I think a part of remaining true to ourselves requires us to also feed the multiple aspects of ourselves. And that is very literal, as well as also figurative, right? Like, because, folks will do crazy things. Like, if, folks don't necessarily know me, but there are several things in life that I promise if we hang out, and one of them is that we're going to eat. I do not play about my food. But there are people who will forget to eat. You so busy studying, showing up to all the meetings on campus that you haven't eaten today. What? How? Like, like, we are human beings who need to sleep, and we need to eat, and we need water, and, exercise is important, so that, it's not just about the life of the mind. And sometimes because, we can make it about the life of the mind, we can also be very ableist in that regard. And we don't actually attend to our needs. And they're multiple. And, so like spending time with friends is important. I haven't seen you in 3 months. What you doing so important that I haven't seen you in 3 months? No, but really, like, and then having people who will call you out on that as well. That is like, I know you have an important goal to reach. I know that this thing is really important to you. And also, I thought our relationship was also important. I value you over that goal that you're trying to accomplish. Doesn't mean I don't support you, but like, can we figure out some time, even if it's 5 minutes to catch up on the phone? We got all this technology to reach other, right? Like that, not losing ourselves is also about being in community. And we can oftentimes isolate ourselves, and, you know, it's like the work. And it's one of the things that I oftentimes tell graduate students. I'm like, you know, the graduate students that I've had the chance to work with, the degree will get done. It's not to belittle it, but it's easier than life in many ways. Life will life. And if you go to class, you turn the papers in, you do the reading, like you can get the degree done, right? It is all of those other hours of your actual life, of, you know, the first year of grad school, for example. I lost my grandmother. And I can, the way it impacted me, and this is just a quick story and then we'll get back to any Q&A. The way it impacted me is I'm in, like, let's just say it's the 10th week of the semester, 10th week, second semester. I've been going to this class all semester long. I show up over an hour late and I thought I was on time. I came in, settled into the chair, looked at the professor when he was getting ready to wrap up the class, like, what's going on here? Like, oh, I guess we're getting out of class early today. Because that is where I was in that moment. And, you know, I don't think we sometimes make room for those real realities. Like, life is going to life. And so we have to be able to navigate that and to acknowledge, right, that like, here I am, I'm doing the school thing, but life happened and it's actually impacting the school thing. I did the readings. I was in class, late as ever, and I thought I was on time. I can laugh at it now. It's hilarious to me. The professor was real cool about it because he was like, something is going on with you because this is unusual. And I was like, oh, wow, I was late today. Got it. Yes, I think I'm being more impacted by the loss of my grandmother than I thought I was.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm seeing maybe one more question in the chat from Dr. Travers. I'm wondering if you all can speak to how you've discerned who you engage in collectivity with.
Mm-hmm. I'm like, I think I'm gonna let Dr. Hill get us started.
No. That's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer it so spot on as much as I've been discerning even more who I do collaboration with, because I think about that as like an entry point, a potential entry point in terms of time. And so I look at like, okay, well, how much time am I spending in this? What is this collaboration actually doing, right? Like, what do I feel in this collaboration? Like, what is this collaboration unearthing for me? Not from a sense of like expected deep relationship, because I know that is very different than being with people that you've known, right? Like, going back just a little bit, I feel like, I don't know if Dr. Callier would agree, but like our agreement with each other started off as a part of a grad school class, right? We were actually paired up to do something. I don't even know what was happening, but we decided we were going, I don't know if Dr. Arana put us together or we had to do a project. So we decided that we were actually going to explore a sort of dialogic conversation together. I actually dropped the course, but we still produced the paper, right? Together. That was a trial moment of collaboration that grew to us realizing we can have difficult conversations with each other. We can put each other, like hold each other's feet to the fire. We can stay rooted in relationship even when we're not being forced to be together, right? So again, thinking about who's going to rock with you when it's not convenient, right? I was no longer in the class. There was no reason for me to actually feel obligated to finish the project other than this was my homie. Like, let's finish this project because it feels good. Let's see where it goes. Let's see where it takes us. And so that's roundabout. That's not a direct, but it's like, I've watched for how I feel in a space, right? Like, do I feel like, going back to like love and stuff, not to be confused with cathexis about emotions and all of the, the feel good chemistry stuff. But like, can I be in an argument with this dude and not want to leave? That was like, it's simple, but it was like, we would really be talking about some heated stuff. Like, we was in the sexism, we was in the Black community, we was talking about nationalism, we was talking about all the things, and I did not want to leave. Not because it necessarily was a great conversation or a topic that I was invested in, but I was invested with him. I was invested in our willingness to want to have the conversation. And so I sensed into, I can be with this. Even if it's difficult, like I can be with this. And that he's not gonna leave me.
Yeah. I would I think I would add, right, one of the collectives that we were a part of, Saving Our Lives, Hear Our Truths, if I use that and to look for some of the examples, right? There's no ego involved. That our work with the girls is the work. Our work to show up to celebrate Black girlhood in all of its complexities, that's the work. And this is not about, will you get tenure on this? This was not about, will you win awards on this? This was not about, will this get your dissertation done? This was not about, will this launch your, your government career, right? This was not about, will you be able to make a documentary film on this thing, right? Like, it was not about, even if those products were produced, right? Like, I want to be clear, like, dissertations were done. People, graduated with degrees, tenure was earned, right? Promotion was earned, right? Like, those products, films exist. Music videos exist. PBS specials exist, right? But that was not the goal of being in relationship with one another. And so the ego was not there, was not in service to our individual needs, even if our individual needs were met. There's a lot there. But that was not the goal. That was not what we gathered around. There were questions, right? Like, in terms of discerning, like, do people show up wholly themselves, or willing to show up their whole, most vulnerable self, whatever that iteration might be in that particular moment, right? But like, if we're agreeing to do this work, this messy work, this dirty work, so to speak, what's your level of sort of vulnerability and investment and being present to whatever we create, right? And so just, as an example of So Hot, for people who might not be familiar with the practice, right? Like, yes, did it meet in after school times? Absolutely. And one of the things that required is that there were snacks, like usually pizza, and there was a structure to what we did, right? But it's like, you better be there at the time that we said So Hot was taking place, because we have agreed that nothing else in the world matters right now except this thing that we're doing right here. Can you be that in tune to me to us to this work that is so much larger than us? Can you give us your undivided attention? If you can't, we ask that you don't show up. Right? Like that's a part of the discerning. Are you willing to actually do the work? Both personally, the internal work to be able to show up. Did you clear your calendar to make sure that you were going to be there? Because this was the most important thing in the world in this moment, our being together in this room together, celebrating each other. Did you show up to that? And so those are a part of the like discernments in relationship to collectivity, right? It's like, can you be present? Are you willing to do the self-work that's necessary? Are you willing to prioritize the work, not in service to your ego?
We're gonna leave it to Dr. Travers to ask the biggest question, big question. We're closing. You all have been tremendous. Thank you again, Drs. Callier and Dr. Hill, for just brilliant remarks and thoughtfulness. The work that you all are doing, the work that you are modeling for all of us. Thank you all for attending and for being here a little past time to take their brilliance in. Right as we are leaving, it's 5:15. Want to be mindful of your time. Dr. Hill, Dr. Callier, what are you working on? Where should we look for you in the world? How are you blessing the people? We could also send out a follow-up email with some of the things that
I'm at the University of Delaware right now. And, I know Dr. Hill is working on a wonderful book.
Yes, she is.
Yes.
More information to come. More information to come. Thank you again. Thank you all again for your engagement, for being here for first in our webinar series of Black Research Approaches. The next iteration of the webinar series is December 1st, where we will be grappling with ethics, methodological ethics, with Dr. Mildred Boveda. And so be on the lookout. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful day, wonderful afternoon. We look forward to seeing you in this space in the future.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. Remember to breathe. Remember your liveliness. Remember to find reasons to make this fun because you opted to be here. And if you didn't, and for some reason you're under some type of force, find joy anyway. That's the best way to get it done. Okay.
Sage reminders. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Michael, we can go ahead and stop the recording at that point.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. And I can pause it right